President Corzo.
Welcome, everyone. We are calling to order at 1:01 p.m. and we will begin with roll call. Trustee Chin?
Here.
Trustee Hitchcock?
Here.
Trustee Proctor?
Here.
Trustee Watkins?
Here.
And Trustee Corzo is present as well. Moving on to approval of agenda, June 6th, 2020.
I make a
motion to approve the agenda. Oh,
It's okay, I'll second it.
Okay, so Trustee Proctor with the motion and Trustee Hitchcock with the second. Roll call. Trustee Chin?
Yes.
Trustee Hitchcock?
Yes.
Trustee Proctor?
yes.
Trustee Watkins?
Yes.
And a yes from me. Okay, moving on to statements. Public statements related to agenda items. Please limit statements to 3 minutes.
Okay. For those that are participating, if at this time, if you would like to make any comments and address the board, please raise your hand using the Zoom functionality. President Corzo, there are no hands at this time.
Okay, moving on to our budget workshop.
Okay, thank you already so much. Joan, I don't know if you want to say anything initially or you want me to just jump into the presentation, whatever your preference.
Well, I guess I should set the stage for everyone in stating that this has been the most unusual budget end of year planning time that we've ever had, that I've ever had in my experience. We went one direction with a set of assumptions, and then with the governors may revise, and then we have learned that the legislature is absolutely certain that federal funding will be provided to the state, which changes that may revise substantially. So I know that our folks in business have been working madly to manage different potential scenarios. So I think that what we will present today is where we are, and then Patrick's going to do a little bit of what if, just so we can be prepared. And then we will walk away from this and wait and see what actually comes. So Patrick, I think you can just take it from here and share with us where we are, what we do know, what we don't yet know, and where we might be going.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We talked about some of this the other evening, and as Joan said too, we're still seeing some changes in our in what we're seeing in the budget. On a positive note, the legislature in rejecting the governor's May revised proposal, and as Joan was just saying too, calling for, assuming there's additional federal funding, it's positive news for not only our district, but districts throughout the state. And it'll be interesting to see, I'm not sure if all of you were joining us earlier or not, but we were just having a brief conversation before we started, just said, it'll be interesting to see what happens on a national level too, the outcry for additional federal funds. So as Joan said, we've seen some volatility in terms of assumptions, and we built some assumptions into the draft budget we provided to you the other evening, and now we believe that those reductions in funding which we had built into the budget will not materialize, and will likely just see deferrals. So the legislature is pretty intent on there not being this devastating reduction to funding for California. So that's positive. So we're going to walk through some of that, walk through the timeline, and then just from a process perspective, some of the information at the latter part of the presentation we compiled in anticipation of some of those draconian cuts we might see. So we're going to walk through some of that, but we want to set the stage too, because this information was provided at a point in time in our budget cycle. because at all points in time, we want to be prepared for any variable that we might have to manage as a district, as a community, in response to the changes in our budget cycle. Okay, so our first slide is our agenda for today. We're going to give you a status of the state budget. We're going to talk a little about revenue and expenditure adjustments since second interim. We talked about some of this the other evening, but we're just going to recap it for everybody as well too, what some of the highlights of the governor's main revise were. We're also going to spend some time, I provided in this presentation for you too, a snapshot of the actual LCPF calculator. So you can see the components of the calculator and how the calculator moves and changes with the data variables as they change, and how our property taxes are factored into that calculator. And then we're also going to give you this list of possible adjustments which were discussed with multiple groups in the district, and it's alphabetized, not prioritized. And these are items, as Joan's saying as well too, that can be considered if necessary. And the necessity of that is changing in response to the legislature's latest action. So we think that the probability of the reductions has been minimized drastically, and so we think the probability of needing to make these reductions on this list has reduced drastically in response to the legislature having a positive impact on the budget. Okay? So the status of the state budget, again, we have the governor's May revise, and these are the high-level components of the governor's May revise we've talked about on a couple of occasions. This LCFF 10% reduction, how it impacts the base of the calculator, how it impacts supplemental funding for the calculator, and then this 10% reduction to minimum state aid. And we're going to show in the calculator where that state aid component is. But our district in our budget is reflected by this 10% reduction to state aid of about $782,000. And also we heard, and we shared with you too, there was different speculations that there might even be the elimination of all state aid for basic aid districts because of the inequities that just making these reductions to the LCPF calculator would result in. So, but our May revise data, we include our budget with this 10% minimum state aid reduction. We have the special ed funding increase up to $645 per ADA. That's about $346,000 for our district. We also had, and built into our budget too, the PERS and SERS contribution reductions, which the governor proposed. So that's built into our budget on a positive note. Then the legislature vetoed the governor's budget, and they call for no reductions to the LCPF funding. So that's positive not only for us, but for other districts. That would be a reversal of the $782,000 reduction we built in our budget. And that's on a multiple year basis. So it's a recurring positive increase for our district. There's calls for additional federal funding. We're going to talk through some of the federal funding we know we're going to receive, but there's calls for even additional federal funding which might be recipients of. And then also there is this concept of deferrals, the call for deferrals if the funding is not received by October. So it's, the legislature is very deliberate, very intent on not having education suffer a funding loss, okay? So we've highlighted for you here too, that the result of the legislature's action, the probability of cuts to our district is drastically reduced, and the needs for cuts are drastically reduced in response to the legislature's action. And then the final bullet on the slide says the information we provided to you regarding possible reduction in expenditures was prepared by staff in preparation for possible elimination of all state aid. We're going to talk through that dollar amount with you as well too, and show you where in the LCPF calculator that dollar amount is. And that list was compiled shortly after the whole shutdown, the pandemic, and certainly was generated prior to legislative action. I can share with you as well that many of the items in this list we're going to talk about shortly were items the district has evaluated in the past when there have been budget challenges. Some of these go back to 17, 18 and prior to that point in time. Again, the information regarding these expenditures, I want to make it very clear, was generated by staff in preparation for possible elimination of all state aid, which is drastically, significantly more than what we had built into our budget. And we also believe that now that reduction is, the probability that has been reduced dramatically. But we still want to go through this exercise with you today. It says if we do see this cycle go back the other way, we want to be prepared. And these are the list of things we can talk about, and Joe might bring back this for the future. Okay, so that's a quick recap of the state budget. This is a quick high-level recap of the expenditure adjustments, revenue expenditure adjustments. We talked about some of these already, but one of the items built into our budget since second interim, we reduced, and in our budget assumptions, we reduced our property tax growth from 5% down to 4%. And our property tax growth for the current year is in excess of 8%, closer to 9% for the current year. So we were conservative looking at next year. Our trend for the past several years, as we've seen this growth, much of that growth is related to turnovers in property. There's still a big capacity in the district. A lot of folks like Joan, we talk about people who have properties and we have generations living in the houses, right? So, but conservatively, we reduced our property tax growth, and every 1% growth or decrease in growth is about $1 million for a district. So just as kind of a touchstone for you too.
Can you repeat that, please?
Every 1% fluctuation in your property tax base is about $1 million. So we talk about 5, okay, so it's roughly. We built in this reduction of the 10% minimum state aid, is about $782,000 for the district. We built in things like reductions in facility fees, revenues, and then there's corresponding expenditures associated with it, but we have a reduction in our revenues built in the budget. We have the increase in the special ed funding we talked about earlier, the $645 per ADA, it's about $346,000. We also have built into our budget the expansion of our special ed resources in response to the audit. This is not insignificant for our district. We believe that long-term this is going to benefit students. We also believe that there may be efficiencies we realize in expenditures. That's some of the Alma initiatives doing a wonderful job the other day. We had those technical difficulties. We're talking about some of those efficiencies we may see as a result of this investment the district's making in response to the audit. But nonetheless, there are expenditures we built in the budget and growth in those expenditures. Every year, this next bullet talks about how every year we have a cycle that we go through. We post all positions in our budget, and every year we have fluctuations in positions. Someone may be out sick or on sick leave. We have a position food services that goes unfilled for a period of time, or a custodial position goes unfilled for a period of time. Every year we start the year with a budget. We show that all those positions are fully funded and fully filled for the whole year. But year in and year out, we oftentimes see that, that the total budget's not realized, but we make those adjustments between second interim and our adopted budget to show that all positions will be filled, and we have to plan to pay the full salary for that position as well as the full benefits of the full year. Okay? We've also, since second interim, we've had some salary adjustments and settlements. We've woven those in. We have standard things like step and column increases. We also have the PERS and STIRS adjustments as part of the governor's May revise. And we built in things like, property liability, workers' comp, dental, other adjustments like that. Our statutory benefits figures are built in. And then we've also adjusted in our budget in response also to the COVID-19. We have seen and realized some reductions in our utilities. So that's just really high level recap of some of the adjustments we've made since second interim, which are built into our budget. And then these are some of the items we've prepared a slide as well too for you that says, what are some of the items we don't have included in the budget as of yet? And recall, we talked about there's some items we still needed clarity on. One of those was the LCPF Calculator, but there's also some of the CARES Act funding, which we didn't have exact dollar amounts on as yet. There were speculative dollar amounts, and we don't build items into our budget until we have real clarity on them. So we have this CARES Act funding of $1,887 per student. That's in excess of $2 million. When we spoke the other evening, I spoke to the other evening, it says some of the concerns you have regarding some of the young people in our community that might benefit from some funding. This is an opportunity for us to potentially fund some of that. It's also intended to offset the costs we're incurring in response to the pandemic. The CARES Act funding along those same lines too. We have an exact dollar amount, which we've cited for you here too. And we do have to share that, and David has been working with the private schools in our community too. We have to, it filters through us, and we're the conduit to the private schools. So there's some of that dollar amount will be reduced in terms of what we receive. We'll work with the private schools in our community. We have this other item we talked about too that's not built into our budget, but certainly we've discussed this as well, this possible elimination of all state aid, and I'll show you the calculator in a few moments. That's an additional $7 million reduction we talked about. Might happen. Again, the probability of that happening now is dramatically decreased. We don't believe that will happen. But other things in our budget, and Allison, you asked the other night about local funds, why there was this decrease. We don't have built into our budget all of the donations that we typically receive. So for PTA and other organizations, we budget those as we receive those. We build them in the first interim. So that's year in and year out. We see this fluctuation and reduction in local funds. There's discussion too that there may be some additional state initiatives to fund some of the issues to offset some of the reductions that were proposed. Some of that is still being dialogued. The HEROES Act we talked about several weeks ago too. What the probability of some of that, what type of, kind of hand in hand with the additional federal funds that the legislature has spoken to. The HEROES Act met some resistance, but there's still a question mark as to whether or not it's labeled that or something else, and is it associated with the federal funds that the legislatures assume will receive? That's a question mark as well too. The next bullet here is a supplemental expenditure reduction line. Built into our budget is this 10% minimum state aid reduction. And then, but also from a function perspective, the calculator, that we have not built in reductions associated with supplemental expenditures as of yet. Supplemental expenditures are part of your overall LCPF calculator. So we could have a dialogue about reducing those expenditures as well too at some point in the near future if need be. The last two bullets on here too, we talked about how Measure V, there's still some potential use of funds in Measure V that aren't all built into the budget yet. There's some flexibility we have with Measure V funds. And the last bullet in here too, just so you know, the district for the Measure X projects had utilized some flexible funds from the general fund. And as we close out the phase one budgets, phase one projects, there's a possibility that we might be able to shift some of that contribution that was put into and committed towards those projects. We may, through efficiencies, do a lot of great teamwork with our partners and contractors. We may not realize all those budgeted expenditures. So there's still a possibility we could shift some of those dollars back into the general fund. And we'll get that clarified for you too as we walk down the process. When we talk about this list of possible reductions, there's also some potential other sources we can put back into the general fund, okay? And now we're gonna walk through the LCPF calculator. Just so we talked about this weeks ago. How does it work? How does it function? And there are two slides here, as a page one and page two. And what you'll see on your slide here are these components of the LCPF calculator on the left-hand side. And you're probably familiar with these terms on the left-hand side. Talk about base grant as part of the LCPF calculator, and then the supplemental grant, right? And then a grade span adjustment. And you'll see for our district that there is this reduction in funding from year to year. Again, the target for our district as part of the LCPF calculator, districts are seeing this 10% reduction. If you look at this total target line of 99 million goes down to $90 million. That's roughly a 10% reduction. 10% of 99 is $9 million plus. So when you go from the target down to your proposed 2021 LCPF calculator, non-basic aid districts, this is the loss. If we were a non-basic aid district, we would be looking at a loss of roughly $9 million. But because we are a basic aid district, and the next slide you can see property taxes, we're not looking at that overall reduction, okay? But this is how this calculator works. It's comprised of your base grant, your supplemental grant, and in the supplemental grant section, you'll see this reduction from 7,142 down to $6.3 million. This is the roughly $800,000 reduction we're talking to you about that's built into our budget. Page two of this slide on the calculator here, what you're going to see is the first line up top here shows this LCF entitlement, which is the same number as we looked on the prior slide. 99 million go down to $90 million, but you'll see down here your property taxes line. Your property taxes that you forecast for 21 are in excess of your entitlement, right? So this $105,000 is in excess of your entitlement of $90 million. So as a basic aid district, the property taxes is what funds your overall LCPF calculator. It funds your supplemental programs, it funds your base. And in addition to our property taxes, this state aid line here, starting in 1920 of $7,821,000, is the minimum state aid guarantee. And there is a reduction in our minimum state aid from 1920 to 2021 of 10% or $782,000. this is the dollar amount we did build into our budget as a reduction, right? So you'll see in this calculate how this functions. This is your minimum state aid. And so built in your budget is a reduction from $7,821,000 to $7 million. The discussions that were kind of hovering was that for basic aid districts, that they were contemplating that there might be this elimination of all state aid to basic aid districts. So recall on the previous slide, I showed you that if we were I'm going to go back up a slide. If we were a non-basic aid district, we'd be looking at a $9 million loss. But because our property taxes are at the level they're at, we're not going to sustain that loss. But from an equity perspective or a fair share hit perspective, how might the state, this was the uncertainty we had, how might the state replicate for us that comparable reduction? And this is how they would do it, by taking it out of your state aid line. But that's, again, now the scenario we're in now, it doesn't look as if this LCFF reduction for any district is going to happen. And so this dollar amount we built into our minimum state aid as a result of that, that will be reversed likely as well too. So we'll be reversing that reduction, and we'll do that likely at first interim, because just cycle-wise, likely done at first interim. Okay, so that's just kind of a recap of the LCPF calculator. You want to know how that functioned. These are the components. There's more. There's like 12 different worksheets and spreadsheets and bells and whistles in there, but this is kind of the fundamental snapshot for you. This is how minimum state aid functions. This is the calculator, how it functions, and this is your property taxes, how they function relative to the LCPF calculator. And what you'll see is, although your property taxes are only going up by a few $1 million, roughly 4% year to year, your amount that you're into basic aid goes up significantly more. And that's because the LCFF base amount drops. It just puts you further into basic aid status. Okay, so that's kind of the recap of the LCPF calculator. And again, the next two slides we're going to walk through were in anticipation that if this $7 million were to be eliminated in 2021, what might we have to contemplate making reductions in order to maintain a balanced budget? Recall also what we talked about the other evening was that at this point in time, in adopting this budget, we are effectively committed to salaries and benefits. We're hiring people, we have contracts we've offered to people. And so at this point in time, from a salaries and benefits perspective, we are committed to 2021 expenditures. And if we were to talk about some of the items in these next 2 pages, we would be looking like at potentially a reduction in 21-22. These would not be 20-21 reductions. These would be 21-22 reductions in order to maintain a balanced budget. Okay. And last comment before I go into those possible reductions, at the last slide I showed you when we talked the other evening was we looked at your multi-year budget, and we looked at your reserves relative to your multi-year budget. And with these variations in funding, what's going to happen is your reserves are going to be affected from a positive perspective. Your reserve numbers will go up as a result of funding going up and as a result of reductions not being made. Okay, so that's at the end of the day, we look at our reserves, and then so it's a matter of how you balance your budget. But again, it goes back to what your reserves are, and your reserves will be positively impacted by the elimination of this 10% minimum state aid, and will be positively impacted by the CARES Act funding that's going to be built into the budget, and that amounts to millions of dollars, which we put back into your reserve line, absent us incurring incremental expenditures. Okay, so that's kind of a quick snapshot for you. And then, Joan, I don't know if you want to say anything else before we get into these next 2 slides. Again, if you want to reiterate anything before we jump into that, but again, we want to reassure people we're talking about.
Well, I think that was very helpful overview. And again, I guess what we had expected was to have to address approximately $7 million in reduction. And so therefore the need for this budget study session. Now that does not appear to be imminent, we do have some areas that we can reduce without touching personnel next year, should everything reverse itself again. And that's why we want to share with you some thoughts about ways that you can reduce. Now, the sheets that you'll see have everything from the kitchen sink to, soup to nuts, the way they say. And just in alpha order, these are just ideas, not suggesting that any of them are good. I think that's one of the things we always want to point out. If we didn't think these were important things to be doing, then we wouldn't be doing them to begin with. It isn't as if we have ever had extra money to throw into doing something unnecessary. So please know that on this list, not suggesting that any of these things are not necessary. At the same time, if we're also going to have to cross that divide of, if we do $7 million, then we need some thoughts around that. So again, if anyone is listening to this, it's very important. We plan on making no reductions to personnel for next year. There are some things we could do that don't touch personnel if we have to. It would be the years out should we not have an economic recovery or something should change at the state level with their decision making. So just a reminder of that it isn't, we are not looking at reducing personnel next year, and that if we do have to make any reductions, we could make things that we could do things that don't touch any of our staff and programs. So with that, I guess it would be best to show our alphabetized list of ideas, thoughts, so we can just talk it through.
Okay, there's a first page. And again, we on the left-hand side, you'll see a description. On the right-hand side, you'll see the dollar amounts. And just if I jump to end of page 2, this is like a 14.9, almost $15 million list of items. And again, these are comprised of both personnel types of items as well as non-personnel items. And again, reiterating what Joan said, I wanted to make sure that's really clear to anyone who's watching the timing of it, the point in time at which we comprise this list, and then the current status of the probability we need to do items that are on this list, okay? So why don't I give folks kind of a chance to glance through the first page, just to read it really quickly. Again, some of these may look familiar to some of you because these are from lists that have been generated in prior budget conversations when we were looking at the need for possible reductions.
So I'll talk through a few of the items because I know them pretty well. We've talked about the fact that we have a gap for athletics. And so we had talked to the board about actually closing that divide because here we are with brand new gyms. So that could be a decision. We have talked about you could combine 2 schools, 1 principal. Not wonderful, but you can do it. There's a position open in our district office right now that we could leave open for a period of time. It does affect our ability to do data gathering. Library hours, we've done that in the past, reduce the amount of time. Right now, we share our facilities rate with our schools. We do a 50-50 split. Maybe we have to say, the district office has to achieve more funds from facility use, so you change that ratio. Other efficiencies at the district office, eliminating our assistant principals. At very large schools, there would be an issue there. Could do it. 5th grade music, there's issues with that because middle school is highly predicated on kids starting in elementary. We do contract a communication person to do some design work for our community report. We do have our own BITSA program. There is a match for deferred maintenance, the IB program at Sunnybrae. Induction providers is part of the coordination of the BITSA. Mentoring and coaching, that's for the principals that we bring in who are new. Our TK4 music. Vacation payout, that's for some of the staff at the district office who there have been times they have not been able to take their vacation, so they're paid. Instead, what you do is insist that everyone take their vacation. Reduce some contracted nurse mandated screenings. Freezing any step and column, of course, requires negotiations. You don't just do that. Let's look at that next. We do have some geometry going on. Now, this part of the class size reduction, if we, you will see that if we increase the number of students in elementary, you then lose your class size reduction. So to be honest, that is not, if you can see the difference, it is not a smart move unless you make those class sizes very large. You can't achieve a savings. There's an overnight stipend for outdoor ed. Publications, those are our publications that we do through communications. Maybe some reduction of some days. Now days, again, that's all negotiated. Supplies. We are not required to run TK. We have, I think, I'm not positive whether it's 11 to 13 classes. School choice, we do a lot with moving people from school to school, and there's a lot of contracted work that we do at the height of that transition time. Special ed efficiencies, maybe some improvements there. We're looking at those anyway. Potentially some paras for technology. The master's and doctorate stipend, again, that's negotiated. Textbook adoption, there's one that we don't have to do right now, and tighten our staffing ratio. So you can see that there's difficulty with any of those things. We don't have to address any of them for the upcoming year, potentially the year out, but these are some of the kinds of things that we look at.
Okay. So that's kind of the summary of the slides. I think that's the last slide we have for you this morning, or this afternoon, I should say, this morning. So again, recap, where we're at budget cycle. Next steps will bring forward the budget for you to approve later in June. Between now and then, the legislature has a deadline of the 15th of June to act. Again, there's still buzz that there may be an August revise, but we will kind of walk down that path with you as well too. And I know that if there are substantial changes at the last minute that the legislature makes, then we have a 45-day period of time from the budget that you adopt, because it's not uncommon in the past where there might be some last minute changes. Lots of districts have their budgets prepared, but we need to produce for you and for the public what those significant changes are after you adopt your budget. So, and that's also acknowledging that, there are oftentimes last minute changes, and there are a lot of administrivia that needs to occur for districts, and dialogues on top of that one may need to occur in response to those last minute changes. So just know, cycle-wise, we'll bring forward that budget for you to approve at the 18th meeting. Dave spoke about kind of the changes in the LCAP obligation. We covered that with you the other night. We did our public hearing on the reserve levels, and again, if those reserve levels change, which those at first interim in response to whatever the final budget is that's adopted. So quick recap, again, these are discussions for us at this point. These are alphabetized, not prioritized. There are some of these items that came up in prior years. There may be additional items for us to consider. In fact, John and I were talking about a couple of things just like, there are two smaller $10,000 items. I forget what they are right now, but I think I have to do with publication. But there may be some other things too, which would still need to be discussed. But again, that's kind of our quick recap of where we're at for this morning, and happy to entertain any questions you might have.
Thank you. Any clarifying questions?
No questions from me, but comments later. Thank you.
I have questions, but not clarified. They don't need, it's not like about the presentation, it's just budget wise. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Can you stop presenting so that everyone can see each other?
Yeah.
Thank you. Perfect.
Oh, you want me to ask them or no?
Yeah, I think it's, yeah.
Okay. I guess my question was, one of them is, there is the possibility that this year we're not reducing personnel, but possibly in the future, like next year.
Are you asking?
Yeah,
Well,
I guess
think,
not. Yeah.
I certainly, I think that, I think that, again, in response to our discussion was, Rebecca, that if we were facing a $7 million recurring revenue loss, right, year in and year out, if we were going to lose that state aid portion, it would necessitate that we have a conversation about how do we maintain a balanced budget, and that significant a loss and a recurring loss might necessitate we have a conversation regarding not only non-salaries and benefits items would represent a really significant portion of our budget, but at all times we want to keep cuts as far away from personnel as possible. But in that type of a scenario, if you were to lose $7 million a year, might you have to have a dialogue along those lines? I think the simple answer to that question is yes, likely you would have to, but it would take some more time to understand exactly that impact and model that out for you.
But we won't really know until a possible August revise.
Yeah, I think so the legislature is, I think the probability of that if the state has to adopt a budget by June 15th, Rebecca, and today is the 6th, I think the probability of us seeing that for the 2021 year is really low. But again, so that's a simple answer to your question. I hope that answers it.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, and I also would add too that, and that's why budget discussion is very difficult to have today. We didn't think it would be this difficult, but in a positive way, because of course people are trying to hold schools harmless. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
But should our economy turn around over next year, then we'll be having a whole different conversation also. Now, should it flatline, then there might be a different kind of conversation. So it's almost too early to tell what we would be planning. We can barely plan for next year. It's very difficult to figure what we would plan for that out year. But so.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Trustee Proctor, any questions?
I had a few. One of my questions was when you mentioned that we had in our budget for all positions, like as if all positions were fully filled. And I was just curious if we're anticipating needing any additional personnel due to like coronavirus and maybe the cleaning, or I don't know.
It's really a good question.
Have we thought about that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, we've been having some of that dialogue, Allison, as there's more clarity on what's necessitated. I mean, we've talked about bus drivers, we've talked about custodians. Some of that is still going to be determined. I think that, as the economy, as the restrictions are loosened, and over this period of time, when we see what happens with the curve, whether it stays flattened or whether we see a spike or if there is a vaccine that's right. So there's all those discussions. We are also making an investment in things like equipment to help with the clean. We saw a video of some equipment just as recent as last week that we're going to be acquiring that's going to help significantly so we can disinfect much more rapidly as opposed to someone doing it manually. There's a machine that we're going to acquire that's a sprayer effectively that we can use to, as opposed to people having to go through. So we're trying to balance all that. I think the simple answer to your question is yes, maybe, but exactly what the obligations are, that's still the CDC, the health officer, they're still trying to figure that out. I spent about 3 hours on the phone on Friday talking about transportation and the logistics and the challenges associated with that. So
it's interesting that you asked that question, because that's a question I asked Patrick also before this. I said fully filled positions.
Right.
So those are, we're the fully filled positions of positions we've had. and continuing and we need, but you're right. There could be additions depending on how we have to roll this out for next fall. So I was asking the same question. What position number are we actually working with?
And can I just chime in with not just in relation to COVID, but what about additional personnel needed for Montessori and the possible movement of rearranging of schools and whatnot? Is that counted in?
The growth of any of the schools is already part of that, because you see, we do an enrollment process early in the year. So we've already counted students. We know where they're going. We then do a staffing ratio. So those positions are already established. So that is done. And that's the positions that I figured Patrick had in there. But as we talk about a possible AB schedule, and how do we meet the needs of students who are struggling, and how do we do some of those equity pieces that we're talking about in order to make sure that everyone is accessing a high quality educational program, there might be some changes.
Is that something that we would or could discuss now, being that it's a budget?
We don't have the program plan yet, so I think it's important to know what the potential plan is for return in the fall, so that then we can take that plan, which we will bring to the board. And actually, you saw the timeline at the last board meeting of all the groups it's going to go to for conversation. And so at that point in time, once we know what the program can be, and I say can because it all has to follow the health orders, then we can talk about how to make that plan the best possible for all of our students. So it'll come back to you.
Okay, thank you.
I just had a few others. One was, and I think I asked this the other night, and I just I spaced out. But the CARES Act money that's potential, especially the 1,887 per special ed student. What was the timing again on that? When do we find out, and how do we when we start planning on how that money would be spent?
Yeah, I don't have an exact confirmed date, Allison. I expect within the next month. That's a range for you. We'll get much greater clarity on that. We'll receive something from, for all the different funds we receive, we actually get a notice that says explicitly what the funding source is, the timeline, the restrictions, the parameters. Here's your accounting code. You need to put into your general ledger with the following accounting code, right? All that. So it's all. So, but I'd say within the next month, I expect clarity on the.
Okay. Well, thank you. And then my next question was, for those, you mentioned that PTA donations and other kind of things are not in the revenue. Are the related expenses in the expense side of things, like for positions and programs?
Yeah,
or
I've had that discussion. For the most part, they're not. It's as opposed to the revenue and the expenditure. Some of it, they might be minimal, but for the most part, we post the revenue and the corresponding expenditure when we receive confirmation of funding.
And remember how Sue brings you that item each year, where you're releasing those positions that are PTA funded, because unless they've received their funding and already deposited it with the district, then those folks are noticed that the funding hasn't come in yet, and then the PTAs do their fundraising, put it in, and then the folks are brought back. So that's that process.
I think that's just important to note so that everybody knows that we're still relying on those donations for those, especially the positions and a lot of the programs that schools are used to having each year. So that's good to know. And then just two clarifying questions. One was, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, you're right to bring that up, because many of our PTAs have been very concerned about the fact that their normal galas and auctions and spring fests and different ways that they go about raising funds were not either not held, canceled, postponed, and so there has been difficulty with them readjusting as rapidly as they had to gather their donations.
And then my last two questions were just like clarifying. One was, you mentioned there was $1 million of Measure V funds that weren't factored in or something yet. And I was curious, were we not planning on spending all of that this year, or we just hadn't allocated those funds to something? And then my second question was, how does it work with the Measure X funds if we ended up having some to come back? Did we initially put some in from the general fund and we get it back, or we just get whatever's left over back, or how does it work?
So I'll answer Measure V and then let Patrick answer Measure X. Measure V, we had $3 million left. Well, left. I don't mean it that way. We had $3 million unallocated, and we had gone back out through a process with our teachers, classified staff, or administrators to say, you know, this is the bond language. What do you want to see? What is most important to you within this bond? I'm sorry, within this parcel tax language. And clear direction was given to bring in more counseling. And so we did spend a portion of the $3 million for the additional counseling services. And we have gone forward with hiring those counselors. It still leaves about $1 million unallocated. We were going to use that funding to support our new science and arts programs. So at this point in time, it is unallocated. And if really push comes to shove, and we're trying to maintain our staff, because the main piece of that parcel tax was attract and retain staff, then that could be used. We're hoping not, because we still would like to go forward with the requests from staff for science and arts, but it has not been allocated at this point. It is available, so it is something to think about. And then I'll let Patrick explain Measure X.
So Measure X, you know, we're providing those routine reports that shows the that final column, which is a reconciliation between the contracted amount and the amount spent and the amount that's encumbered, and there still is a balance. And there are assumptions built into our budget too for things like contingencies, escalation contingency, and construction contingency. As an example, as we complete the Bayview gym, and we're about to close that out, there are likely some dollars that were in the budget which we may not spend. There were some dollars there were some one-time dollars that the district had received in the general fund which were unrestricted, that were committed and moved over to pay for the projects, and there was some escalation in the cost beyond what was originally anticipated, so there was moving of the funds over, and those were general fund dollars. They can be moved back with no restriction. So as we get near to close out these projects, we have the ability to move those dollars. Whether those dollars get moved to Measure X Phase 2, which is our intent, anticipating what their escalation might be there, or you also can move them back to the general. They were general fund dollars unrestricted. They can go, essentially, they can go back to the general fund, or they can go toward your Measure X Phase 2 projects. So does that answer your question, Allison?
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
I'm done.
Questions, Trustee Watkins?
I did have one around as we are thinking about the special education audit and possible changes there, are any of those items embedded? Because when we're looking at reductions, we're looking at efficiencies, which is a reduction, doesn't necessarily take into account additions. Additional, a lot of the recommendations were things like increasing personnel and having additional support. So
that's those additions are built in. John, I saw you talking. John, you're muted though. So, but yeah, no, we built in people in response that the audit had recommended. There are individuals that are built into the budget. to, again, with the intent of having efficiency, and through that efficiency, it may result in a longer term, whether it's repurposing dollars towards supporting along with the maintenance of effort requirement, or it results in inefficiencies that may result in less expenditures. And there are very explicit, as you may know really well, Shar, those very explicit restrictions when it comes to maintenance of effort in terms of what a district can and cannot reduce in the form of expenditures. But we believe that through some of these investments in people, it will result in efficiencies in program, and there likely may be reduction in expenditures in the explicit program, but they may be able to be repurposed in the form of support for students. Does that make sense?
Well,
So
let me give you a couple of very specific examples of what you're talking about. So for example, we've really been, I should say HR, let's call it, give them a shout out. HR has been very intensive about their outreach, recruiting, and hiring. And they have hired 4 additional SLPs for our district. That is such an enormous step because we had so many on contract. So that's an efficiency, because bringing our own staff in, number one, it's better for all of us, but it also is an efficiency. And at the same time, the audit very clearly said that there needed to be additional support at the district level for ALMA in making some of these changes, and so we've built that in. So there's the 2 sides: the hiring our own, which is happening, and that will reduce some of the budget, and then at the same time adding where they saw gaps. So that's just some very concrete examples.
Yeah, okay, that's helpful. My other question is around something that I don't see on the list, and I remember having this conversation when we were looking at reductions before, are any of our, I guess, online programs that folks are using. I'm interested in, at some point, I would like to know, have a list of what we utilize as a district and general usage, because I think that that's something that sometimes, I don't know, my assumption is that's looked at a department by department level, right? Like, what are the programs that services using for general education? What are the programs that special ed's using for special education? But I think that that's one thing that, tends to be further away from kids, and sometimes is really beneficial and useful, but if it's not being utilized, not something that I would want us to be investing in, right? Like, that would be something I'd be more interested in us looking at cutting over people. And I know we're not talking about that now. I just think that as we think about moving forward, like, that's not something that I'm seeing listed. And I guess I'm kind of wondering why, and then also would like for that to be something that
explain what you're saying of what kind of a
things like one that just comes to my mind, because Dale mentioned it the other night, Brain Pop, right? Like district subscriptions to like these online programs.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because they're expensive, they are. And often, whatever we would be paying is probably more than a salary, right, for a district-wide subscription to those programs. So if it's useful and folks really like it, I'm not saying we cut it. I'm just interested to know more about what we're utilizing and how much those cost and how much we're using it. I feel like I had one more, but I can't think of it right now. So.
I am wondering where, so I'm not looking at the list right now, but I'm wondering, so we know that we haven't been in school for several months, right? I was looking at a topic that we have discussed in the past, because I've been actually getting some requests for us to review it again, and it is around our SROs. And being that school is not in session, the police are not providing a service to our schools right now. I want to look at that, and I want to know, like, where does that live in our budget? I know we've gone through that in the past. I don't recall right now, and I actually want to I personally will just say right now that I would like to end those contracts and invest those funds into something else more along the lines of social workers or a wellness program. I know the Peninsula Healthcare District did a partnership with San Mateo High School and had pretty impressive results. And so I propose that we look into that at some point. But I am wondering if you could just tell me right now where that lives. And I'm pretty sure it's not in those lists of reductions that you gave us, but what would you have titled it if it had been, et cetera?
So it would be SRO Program, and it's funded with, I think, partially general fund and partially it's possible through some of our wellness or supplemental. I'd have to double check that. I don't know if you know that detail, Patrick, right off the top of your head. We'd have to check. Yeah, we can check where it lives, but it is an SRO program of about $100,000, I believe.
I would think it's more than that. I think it's like, so I think the last time that we had this on our agenda was May last year, because I actually went through and I pulled it up. But it may have been that we did a 2-year contract. I'm not sure. I pulled it up. I looked at like the general info. I didn't like look at that date in the contract. But I know that we can terminate it anytime we want. And I'm wondering, like, have we been paying them for something that we haven't been receiving these past couple of months? Like, I know Foster City, we have an SRO through Foster City, but Foster City actually funds that. And I think if it's really important to the SMPD, that they can figure that out. I know they're not struggling for funding like we are.
We can bring that back.
Thank you. And then just in general, I'm really, okay, questions. I'll make this a question. So it's safe to say that we are in a much better financial position than we had expected, right? That's like the summary. And we're now, like, we're looking at these lists just kind of to start thinking about it, and not because we need to make any decisions.
Yeah, we're not asking to make any, had we, I suppose, had we seen this cycle going, we were faced with that $7 million reduction in funding, Noelia, we would have been asking for some direction that says, of this list, what, right? These are options, and right? So that's why we had started to compile it for you.
Thank you. Okay. Rebecca, did you have a clarifying question? I see your hand raised.
Rebecca did say she's having some technical difficulties and she's having trouble.
I just realized that.
Are you trying to reconnect her?
I think what she did is she went back in through the link that Anna sent, and there she is. You got it, my bad.
There we go.
Thank you. Oh, it's always me, guys. I'm so sorry. So the points that other people brought up in regards to programming and ensuring we have positions that we deem essential, like, is that going to be a topic? If you guys already discussed this, I'm so sorry, that we would have now, or can we agendize that?
So I think what you're talking about is that once we know what the plan is for next year, what kind of AB schedule we're putting in place, we'll be looking at the personnel delivering that and whether or not we need some additional supports to make that work. So it will follow that timeline that David Chambliss shared with all of us at the last board meeting. And so it will come to you as a board.
Okay, because I just want to ensure, again, kind of what I heard, choppy, but I heard it. You know, especially now, certain things that we want to focus on, our focus might have changed, or we want to, maybe not necessarily have changed, but they've jumped to the top of the list. And
Right.
so I just don't know. Is that the same thing that you're talking about? Is what will come to us later?
Yes, I feel that that's probably the best place for it to come to you, because right now determining what kind of supports we put in place for next year without knowing what the program is going to be it does actually just is a waste of our time. We need to know what is the program we're trying to implement that does follow the health orders, and then how do we make that the best program possible. So it will come to you. And that is why at your next board meeting, you're going to receive an agenda, a new board calendar, which agendizes 2 more meetings in July. And I'm sorry about that. We usually try to take July off, but in this year, we're not going to be able to do that. We need that time in case we need to discuss program.
Can we just, not in case, but we will?
Yeah, probably so. Christine Gong, also, I want to go back, Noelia, Christine Gong is listening, and she was able to look up the SRO contract is $257,000, and it is supplemental and unrestricted. I believe it's a 2-year contract.
Yeah, that's more around the number I had remembered. And
Yeah.
so just to clarify, that's that amount per year or for 2 years?
2 years, that's good, right?
Well, we'll have to have Christine, who's listening, check that, because I don't have the detail in front of me.
Thanks, Christine.
Yeah, we love that she's listening in. So we'll see if she could tell us that. We might have to come back with you to it. We might have to bring that back, but she's trying to get you some info.
Superintendent Rosas, would you like me to give Christine the ability to
No,
talk?
she's on her computer trying to find that info. So,
got it.
but it's okay.
Would you mind just for like a newbie here explaining exactly what it is that we pay for like for what does an SRO do, and like just give me a little bit of information about what that?
Actually, I know I can see that Sarah Drinkwater is on the line, and Sarah is the one that oversees that program out of her division. I don't know, Sarah, if you could respond to that question, give a little bit more background.
Sarah, have brought you into the meeting.
Yes, I think I unmuted. Okay. So wanted to confirm, yes, it is a 2-year contract, and it is a shared program with a high school district as well. And there is a contract for 3 secure SROs who mainly work out of the high school district, but they're available for us at any time, and they also spend maybe a day at the middle schools. And so it's 3 SROs that sort of split the middle school complexes, but they begin and spend the majority of their time at the high school. And so for us, they do some teaching at the schools. They do some small group work. They become very involved one-on-one with students. They are a part of SST or care teams, if that's appropriate. They may assist with if a student is talking about any concerns related to suicide or threat assessments, and very supportive on campuses and support to students and families. They've even, assisted with some over the years, sort of some well family checks with us. And so they're great partners. They're also at the table with us for our SARB attendance committees that we do for children and families, for students and families.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And then Christine has pulled up the information on her computer. It's 257,000 for the 2020 year, 265,000 for the 2021 year.
Yeah, and I'll just say really briefly, my thinking is like, there's many things that the police department still has to collaborate with us on. And like, if we could, like, there's a different way to do that, still keep the same support for our students, I think. And it has been done elsewhere. So I know it's not agendized. So just in terms of like, if we're talking about reductions, that is a significant amount of money that I think we need to explore.
Okay.
Sorry, can you repeat those numbers again? Can you repeat the numbers of how much we
Sure,
paid?
I can. Sure, I can. Hold on. 257,000 for 2020, 265,000 2021. And it is an agendized topic because we're talking about all of whatever budget reductions we might need to look at, and that was not on the list. So we can add it to the list of things that's a possibility, and we can also bring it back to discuss.
Yeah, I would. I just want to echo. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You probably were going to say what I was about to repeat.
No, I was just going to echo what Noelia shared and just say, I do think it would be good for us to, I would like for it to be back on the list of things. And regardless if we're making reductions or not, I want it to be something that we do talk about. I think there's a lot of different perspectives on how they've been used. And I think given the landscape right now, it's something that we need to be really mindful of. And I'll just say right now for me personally, given our local response to what has been happening and our local response on Wednesday, I have a heightened sense of responsibility to ensure that you know, our Black and Brown students feel safe at school, and I don't know that this is going to help them do that. So I think it's something that we need to talk about further. So whether, yeah, regardless of if we're going to be looking at cuts.
I just want to chime in. That's kind of what I was saying, not necessarily specifically to that, but just all programs / positions that we're funded. Kind of like where Shara mentioned maybe funds could be used more wisely, that we think. So I didn't know if that was something that we would talk now being budget, or if that's something we can agendize.
So Rebecca, I'll just say that I understand what you're saying, like very generally speaking, and now I understand that you think like this is one example of what you were like pointing towards. I think we can do that, is my understanding from what Joan said, because it is related to our finances. But if you have other examples, that'd be really helpful, because like I don't know what, like, I can't like visualize what
you're not in my
you
brain.
Yeah.
No, I just, you know, because of the talks we've had and how the world is going, we have in the beginning of joining the board wanted to prioritize certain things, and equity being one of them. And so I just, whether we take funding, if we were to take funding away, looking at, if we're specifically talking about SROs, maybe exactly what are they doing, but also like multicultural books that we've talked about. Like, when I know those are, I don't think anything's been added or allotted in the budget for the things we've talked about and want, that I think are extremely important, I guess. So Montessori, special ed, and then multicultural books, trainings, staff for that. Is that better or no?
So on SPED, we just talked about that. We talked about that we're trying to follow the audit expectations. They would like to see some efficiencies, such as hiring our own staff. So we are doing that. And then at the same time, they wanted some additional staff, and that is in the budget. So that is built in. Montessori, Christine reminds me that we have set that up so that they have their Montessori TOSA to help them build their program. That's already set in into the budget. Now, multicultural books is, we do usually add library books each year. And, you know, we haven't, I don't know that we've particularly said only buy multicultural books, but there's usually a refresh in our budget. So just responding to those things that you're bringing up, but open to hearing if there are things as you folks think about things that you'd like us to bring. We can certainly bring the staffing formula. I mean, we have 1,200 staff, so I think it's probably more effective to go through programs, such as what you just did with the SRO program. That program may not be something that's meeting a need right now, and then you look at who's related to that program. So, I mean, we can do it any way you want to, and we can pull those exact numbers. So.
No, I don't need those exact numbers. I think you helped me, and sorry for taking up time. It just takes me a little longer to understand some things. Yeah, I just want to make sure. There's been a lot of stuff on our to-dos from the beginning that I don't feel have been accomplished, and so I just want to ensure that we are going to do that. And so just to double check where we are on those lists of everything that we've asked for, particularly, I believe one of the gala fund a need was books for every classroom, you know, and so, and if that's not going to come in from fundraising, maybe something like that is added to the budget just to ensure, because that's super important, to ensure that's happened. Does that make?
So you're talking about more book budget for the classrooms if we are not in a fiscal situation.
I think even if we are in a fiscal situation, but yeah, okay, never mind. I'm just kind of talking out loud, and now you know. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.
That actually, Rebecca, while you were talking, I remembered we lost funding for the parent involvement project.
Yeah, okay.
So I want to, like, my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the funding for that was pretty much ended, I think, this school year, or possibly partially for the next school year.
Okay.
And so that is something that, so basically that program has or will be ending soon, and where, like, so where does that live? And I just want to, maybe we can talk about that a little more.
Yeah, so I mean, just for clarifying, like, you guys understand what I'm trying to say or no? It's hard for me to well, talk, as you can see, but get my point across. So that's kind of a program area, right, that we should look into. So I guess maybe all the, I don't want to say, oh yeah, you guys can't see me, I'm sorry, quote unquote extra programs, if you will, you know, like, that's what I want to look at as well, like what Noelia just pointed out with the PIP program.
So David Chambliss is also on the line, and he did want you to know that last summer they spent a significant number of dollars on collection of multicultural books for each library, and he will ask Susie Batter in our IMC for that rundown so that I can get that to you. She's not on the line right this minute. But then on the PIP project, Sarah, I don't know if you can speak to where that is, because part of it is continuing, part of it has ended.
Okay.
Hello, again. Yes, the donor, a gentleman, has decided to discontinue his many, many years of supporting and funding the PIP program. Carrie Hazelton, the principal of the preschool program where PIP lives, given the funding over the years, put together a plan to be able to continue with dollars that remained, continuing the PIP program with those funds through 2021. However, there was a particular position, family support person at the kindergarten level that cannot be funded by PIP funds going into the 2021 school year. So we are looking at other ways to utilize and place that person should she be interested in a position in the district. So part of Carrie is able to continue some of the aspects of the program with funds that she has through 2021.
So it's a topic of conversation in this coming year, Noelia, if you are interested in looking at how to absorb it as a district.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know the funding amount for that? There was, I think we talked about it, but I don't remember what was the amount that we lost from the donation or the donation ending.
I don't have that right at my fingertips here. I would have to look that up for a more accurate answer for you.
Christine Gong has got that computer going. So God
She's
love
like Google.
her. Oh, she says PIP is, hold on one moment. Let's see, 193,000 for 2021 is what we're getting, but it was 403.
Oh, wow.
So that's a significant drop, right? Half, basically.
So it seems like that was like a priority for us. 200,000. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, is not like a huge amount of money when you look at how much revenue we bring in. So I think it would be nice to see how we could prioritize certain areas that we want to make a priority and we want to continue seeing. So I don't know what that looks like, but I don't know. 200,000 doesn't jump out to me as like a huge amount.
Yeah.
I know, like, I had just in terms of like staying on topic with the parent involvement project, and it also kind of just relates to SRO to the SRO issue as well. I know that like there was like certain reporting done, or like certain, like, you know, what the SROs presented in terms of how many contacts they made, how much, you know, like how they present their data to us in terms of whether it's effective or not. And I remember feeling very like I wanted more data. Like that wasn't, like it wasn't the data wasn't meaningful enough for me to really believe that, like, yeah, I just remember wanting more data. And I remember feeling that way similarly about the parent involvement project. I know there was like a lot of reporting done to like the donors, or to was it Silicon Valley? I don't remember who it was that managed the funds.
Silicon Valley Community Foundation. You're right.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if like, do we have like our own way of like internally assessing the effectiveness of our programs, and whether, like, you know, are there like tangible metrics that we are wanting to see, and are we seeing that? Just, you know, just like how our English learner classes, our newcomer classes for many years, didn't have entry and exit assessments, and like I'm just wondering, like I think it's really important financially for us to make sure that our programs are effective, and being that we have had these issues in the past, and I feel like there has to be some kind of like rubric or tool that we can use to really make sure that our dollars are counting and that they're being effective.
So for your PIP program, because it has been a grant program, basically as a donor-run program, there are some metrics around it. So that could be gathered for you as you make a decision as to whether you want to continue it.
Yeah, when would we have to make that decision? I feel like it's pretty time sensitive, no? I mean, and we also have to think about like how that program even works in this, you know. But I do think like if we're paying for someone to like reach out to families and support them, like that should still be happening. I'm hoping it is. It probably is.
Mm-hmm.
But then we would have to kind of adjust the metrics, right? Like the data would change, and we would have to kind of update it to reflect what's actually happening.
We need our Carrie Hazelton to be here, because she's the she knows that program so well. But what we could do is I think that one of your July meetings could easily be to bring that back and look at where we are with the PIP program, what data we had collected, what was it, what were they doing, what data was collected, what seemed to be effective, what pieces of it do we want to continue. I think we could do that in our first July meeting if Carrie would be available.
And yes, Joan, you're correct. There is developmental screening data around the preschoolers' progress through the year. There's also parent engagement and parent training data that is collected, so that can be shared.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm making note that you'd like to bring that one back.
And again, like, please just let me know, just tell me stop, it's for another time. But I really want us to, I mean, you guys have said it more succinctly, but basically manage our funds more effectively and ensuring that it's supporting every student. And so if our lower SES students need something, that needs to be a focus, or our special ed community, you know, any underperforming groups or trends, that's what we should be looking at, is providing support.
Rebecca, I'm just going to interject here because I hear what you're saying. Like, I think like you mean really well. And I think that we all want the same thing. But for me, like you're making really general statements that I don't like, without having like some tangible like examples or ideas. Like
Okay.
I'm not really like fully understanding. So I hear what you're saying. Like I said, I think like you mean really well, and I think we all want that. But I feel like it's important that if you want to make those statements, definitely do. But if you have like tangible things that will make what you're trying to communicate a little more effective.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Okay. I'm going to think about that stuff.
Thank you. Okay. Do we have any more clarifying questions? And then I think we can take public comment and then discussion. Okay, why don't we, yeah. Thank you, Peter. I see you.
Again, for those that are participating with us via Zoom today, if you have any public comments and want to address the board, please raise your hand using the Zoom button for raising your hand and functionality, and you'll have 3 minutes to address. President Koza, looks like we have no requests to address the board.
Okay, I'm gonna give it like a couple more seconds. Please give us a public comment. Just kidding. No, not really. I'm serious, but it's okay. All right, seeing no public comment, let's go ahead and move on to discussion. Trustee Chin.
So thank you, Patrick, for the presentation. I think in some ways, I feel like this is 2017 all over again, when we're going back and looking at all the budget reductions before Measure V came in. And so I think this is sort of a tough time. I think it was very helpful to have the LCPF Calculator because that definitely put actual numbers to what we're looking at. The state, aid or the state part that could maybe be taken away for the fair share was helpful to sort of put down numbers to that as well and to see how that could impact our budget. Overall, I get the feeling, really we are looking at it, and you did provide 2 slides of potential cuts. But as you stated earlier at the beginning, we don't really know. Right now, Governor Newsom put out one plan, the legislature put out a conflicting plan. Until they adopt the budget on June 15th, we really don't know how that's going to impact us. But we do have the feeling that if there are going to be any impacts, really where we're not going to feel it is in 2020, 2021. It's going to be 21, 22.
Right.
So my sort of thought about this whole thought is I hear all the discussion about the different programs and the people and everything else, but in some ways, I almost feel like it might be a little premature because we just don't know yet. We don't have the numbers. Maybe when it comes to August, we'll really have to go ahead and start making cuts. But in the end, it'll be the 21-22 calendar school year that we're going to have to make all those cuts. I am concerned about the PTA funds, especially because the galas and the auctions and everything else were not didn't happen. So I know there's a number of the schools that have a lot of their funding is an issue. I am concerned that, I actually feel like the SROs, they better not have been charging us at the moment because I couldn't see why they would be. They shouldn't be.
Remember, Ken, that we were going to utilize them for some of the attendance support, but I don't know if they have done any of that. So we'll check.
Yeah,
we'll double check all of that.
Yeah, if anything, they should just basically say, hey, look, yeah, obviously we're not charging you for that part because we haven't been in school. Really, I do understand the issues about us taking a look at all the different things and all the different cuts. I'm actually more looking towards, the new normal and the reality, the fact that, school in some ways isn't going to be the same. And in some ways, because of COVID-19, we've launched ourselves really fully into sort of the technology era, and the fact that we are in Silicon Valley, and the fact that teaching is not going to be the same. And so what I would personally like to see over the next year as we look at the budget issues, well, one, over the next year that we come back and look at all these programs. And so, like, I know you were talking about coming back in July, or the first meeting in July, but I'm pretty sure we have to also talk about the fall programming and other things, and I wasn't sure whether or not that's the right timing. I'm looking at it as like the whole next year, because we will then have a better idea of what the budget impacts are going to be. And we can actually go thoroughly into either go back to the PIP program or go back into the SROs or whatever the other programs there are that we want to look at. And then at the same time, my hope is to look at, well, what can we actually save money on by considering what we've learned from distance learning and using the efficiency stuff that we've done there. So whether it's, hey, we don't need to buy that many textbooks anymore because now we're actually using the online stuff, and whether or not we can maybe transfer some of that money to technology use, like more Chromebooks or something, or hotspots or whatever it is. It's just like, I would love to see sort of those type of sort of things on the list, because what you've shown us is stuff that we've seen like in 2017 or we saw in 2018. You know, it was sort of recycled list, but I get it. I mean, because that's what we have. That's our old playbook. But you know, with distance learning, it's a new normal, and I feel like we have to look at it in a different way. And I know that we are looking at fall opening, and I know that does take the priority of everything just to try and get the kids back into school. But I hope that over the next calendar year, that we really take a deep dive into what we've learned from distance learning, what works, and what are the budget savings that we could make there. You know, I am also concerned about just the energy costs. Like if we end up going into and putting AC in, you know, how much of our general fund do we actually pay for electricity? And if there is a good rate of return on the investment of solar, then, you know, does that mean that we pay back, you know, the solar costs within 5 years, 10 years, and then the general fund doesn't have such a big impact? So I'm thinking more of sort of the different creative ways in terms of how we can save money and look at our budget. But I also think that I also feel like we are talking about a lot of this stuff where, you know, again, we may not be there yet, you know, and maybe we have to talk about it in an August revise in a couple months. But that's just my gut feeling. So, but thanks for the presentation. I do think it was helpful. I did like the calculator. I was thinking about the extra money that we get from it, and how it would impact us and how we go further into basic aid. So I do thank you for the presentation.
Trustee Hitchcock, any discussion points?
I think I already did, but Patrick and Christine, I know you guys have, it's been really hard with all of the changes. So I do appreciate you staying up to date with that and the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Trustee Proctor.
I don't have a lot much more to add other than I appreciate the presentation and all the hard work, and actually really appreciate the conversation that we've had so far today. I would like to see us bring back this topic of the SROs and really understanding what it is we're getting and what do we really need and how we can maybe find some other solutions there. What really concerns me is just, I keep going back to this thought of that there may be kids that come to school only half time, and I really want to find ways that we can provide resources to those kids that are not going to be at school all the time and need and have needs, and they're not going, maybe they won't have parents at home, they need somewhere to go. And so I know it's not, this is not like a concrete thought that I have, but it's just something that is weighing heavily on me. And so as we look towards the fall, and if there aren't going to be these crazy budget cuts that we were initially thinking, how can we really support those families? And, otherwise, I appreciate our conversation for the day. So thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Watkins.
I don't think I have too much more to share. I think I had comments and questions in my question. So.
Thank you. I just thought of something else that I'll just touch briefly on, and then I think I'm all good after that. And Patrick, you may have mentioned this, so please refresh my memory. In terms of the revenue that we were getting from the annex and like how that has basically, I'm pretty sure it hasn't been coming in these past couple of months, correct?
Correct, yeah.
And so what is our plan? Like, will it be coming in over, like, did Annex ever do summer? I'm not sure. Did they do summer? Are they going to do fall? Like, what? Even if we do fall, it's probably going to be greatly reduced, right? Or I don't know.
Well, we're still working on that. It's a really good question. And because we don't know enough yet, we didn't add it to any of our sheets. But they're going to put on a summer camp, 2 classrooms, 12 kids in each of the classrooms, just to practice basically the the re-entry into school. They definitely are planning on running their program in the fall. The question is that they need to know what the program in the day is going to be, because that's going to tell them what they're going to need to run. And I do have to say that as Allison and you are both kind of bringing this up, if our staff have elementary age children of their own who aren't in school while they're trying to teach in school, we have an added complexity there. So these are some things where that will come to you when we're discussing the program for the fall. And this piece that you're bringing up, this has kept a lot of us up at night trying to figure out how does the childcare part fit into to whatever program we try to run. So it's coming your way soon.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Patrick, were you able to clarify whether, like?
I was just going to share with you, Noelia, that when we look at, we share with you too, and some of the budget information, that there are reserves for the annex that have been that would be drawn down, right, in response to the reduction in revenue we've seen. So that's the plans that we will draw down those reserves and those funds. And then also, as we reconcile these CARES Act funds that Allison, we spoke to you about a little while ago too, the umbrella of the CARES Act is really to assist multiple fronts, but it's also a response to the pandemic. So as we reconcile, is there, along the lines of the resource that Dr. Rosas was speaking to, the need, as we reconcile the CARES Act funds, do we need to earmark some of those funds for support through the annex? And so we still have to go through those steps too. So there's a reserve we can draw upon. We also can draw upon these umbrella CARES Act funds as a possible other source too. But we still need to find out the exact dollar amount to find, right? And then also gauge, once we start in the fall, what are the resources required in the fall, who can come through, and how much we're going to see in decline in our revenues associated with staff. So there's still some steps to take towards it. That's a little ambiguous for you, but I'm trying to tell you the bigger context of it. Hopefully
And now Christine is sending us the actual numbers. She's pointing out that preschool and annex stopped collecting fees when we all went home. Right. So that was March. And so fee base is $192,000 loss each month. And the annex is a $400,000 loss each month. And so we haven't been collecting the fees, but we did commit to our staff to continue to pay. I mean, at first we thought we were going to come back at some point in time in the spring, and then it just kept going on and on. And now we are coming back in summer and this fall. So, but there has been a loss. So they do have reserves, it's true. They do have reserves that they will have to utilize. But it also means that we're not generating any funds from, and these are enterprise funds. These are things that we put in place in order to help not only for our students and families, but also as a way to support general fund.
Thank you. One more thing, and it'll be my final comment. And this is just kind of like random idea, but I'm wondering if we know whether there's been, like, basically, since we've lost so much income in ways that we normally would receive income, is there like something that we could do in terms of like our rental, like our facilities that we rent out? Like, I know that's definitely like, is that still on pause? Like, as restrictions have eased, are we opening that up? Are we like reaching out to people and reminding them, hey, we do have facilities that you can rent? I know that that would require, our janitors to come clean up, but I think, you know, we're paying them anyways, like they can, you know, if they can do that instead of all of the other work that they would have done when the school is filled with kids. I'm just wondering.
So right now with, we are talking about how to manage any kind of additional visitors on campus. Under the summer program, we're not supposed to have any kind of outside folk on the campus, but by fall, we may be able to manage something, but I'm not sure yet. I'm waiting for the final health order. Because we do want to encourage our
like over summer, we only have certain sites that are going to have kids, and then all of the other ones are empty.
So we already rent to the San Mateo Park and Rec and to the Foster City Park and Rec. And so anyone who had a previous relationship with us for the summer programming, we've made arrangements with them. And they're running the program, their program based on that same child care regulation, 12-to-1, bubble cohort, all of that.
Okay. Okay, well, those are my final comments. Anyone else want to add anything? No? Okay. And I'm looking at our agenda, Joan, and I should have asked this question previously, but I see adjournment next, but then there's like item number 7. I don't know if that's there on accident, but I was confused by that. Do we just adjourn at this point?
Yes, I'm sorry that I looked at that and we took it down and reposted it with the correct, but it is the adjournment. Yeah, there's nothing.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Great. So thanks everyone for the discussion. Thank you, Patrick and staff for the presentations. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Trustee Proctor. Do I have a second? Shara, thank you for the second. Roll call vote, Trustee Chin?
Yes.
Trustee Hitchcock?
Aye.
Trustee Proctor?
Yes.
Trustee Watkins?
Yes.
And a yes from me. We are adjourning at 2:44.
All right.
Thank you.